They brought a hunter to class. Humans shocked everyone. The Griv had been living under the floor panels of room 14 for 3 weeks. It had bitten 2 maintenance workers, chased a Lunari student out of the corridor, and survived 4 separate attempts to remove it. The Academy had finally posted a notice on the common board. Do not approach. Specialist team scheduled for next week. That was the morning Dale arrived. Nobody paid much attention to the new student at first. The docking bay received transfers regularly, and the students of Valos 9 Academy had learned to size up newcomers in about 4 seconds. Dale did not give them much to work with. He was human. That part was known ahead of time, but he looked nothing like the dramatic descriptions in the alien media files. No visible weapons. No intense expression. He carried one worn pack over one shoulder, and he was reading a small paper booklet while he walked, which was unusual enough that Pri noted it immediately. Pri was a Lunari, 2nd year, and she had been studying Earth biology as an independent research interest for 6 months. She had read all the public classification files. She knew the numbers: gravity index, toxin resistance ratings, average endurance capacity. She had been mildly excited to meet an actual human. Standing 10 feet away from one, she updated her expectations downward. He looked tired. He looked ordinary. He looked like someone who had not slept well on the transit and was now reading a paper booklet about. She tilted her head: local plant species. She opened her datapad and started a new entry. He was escorted to room 14 by an administration aide who left him at the door with a quick explanation of the seating system. Dale stepped inside, looked around once, and found an empty seat near the middle. He put his pack down, took out his paper booklet, and waited. Professor Civ entered 2 minutes later. She was one of the older faculty at Valos 9, a Durathi woman with pale gray skin and the quiet authority of someone who had spent 40 years in a classroom and did not need to raise her voice about it. She had read the full Earth classification file the evening before, not the public summary. The full file. She had made herself tea first. She called attendance without ceremony and moved straight into the day's topic: comparative pain response in high-density gravity organisms. She asked the class an opening question: how does prolonged gravitational pressure affect the development of neural pain thresholds across generations? The room was quiet. It was a hard question, and it was early. Dale raised his hand. Civ looked at him. Go ahead. He answered in clear, simple language. He talked about how organisms under high gravity developed compression tolerance early in development, which meant their neural systems learned to filter pain signals faster to keep the organism functional. He used Earth as an example without being asked, not boastfully, just as the nearest reference he had. He finished and looked at his booklet again. The room stayed quiet for a different reason now. Rune was a Vorathi student, 3rd year, and he was large even by Vorathi standards. He sat at the back and took up 2 seats without trying. He had made a comment when Dale walked in, something about Earth being overrated in the classification system, that the files existed to justify funding allocations, and not because humans were actually remarkable. A few students had laughed. Dale had not responded. Now Rune was looking at the back of Dale's head with a different expression. Civ marked something in her records and continued the lesson. After class, in the corridor, the Griv made its appearance. It came out of the floor vent near the water station and moved fast along the base of the wall. Students scattered. Someone made a sound that, loosely translated, meant extreme displeasure. A 3rd-year student pressed himself flat against the opposite wall and stayed there. Dale came out of room 14 into the corridor, stopped, and looked at the Griv. He watched it for about 3 seconds. It was moving in short bursts, stopping, reading the space, moving again. He could see it was not aggressive, it was scared, which made it fast, and unpredictable, which made it seem dangerous. He stepped to the left, not toward it, and crouched slightly. He placed his paper booklet flat on the floor. The Griv's attention went to the booklet. One more step, weight on the right foot, left hand low and open. The Griv turned toward him. He waited one breath. Then he picked it up. The grip was firm, behind the neck, thumb and 2 fingers. The Griv made a short sound and went still. Dale stood, walked to the exterior vent panel at the end of the corridor, worked the latch with one hand, and released it into the maintenance crawlspace beyond. He came back, picked up his booklet, and looked at the small dent in the cover where the Griv had briefly tried to bite it. Pri was standing in the corridor doorway, with her datapad raised. "How," she said, "did you know to do that?" Dale looked at her. "My family kept animals. You learn to read how they move." He paused. "Is that a recording device?" "Yes," Pri said. She did not lower it. He seemed to consider that. "Okay," he said and walked on. Pri looked down at her datapad. Entry 4 read. What he calls reading, we classify as advanced behavioral prediction. He does not appear to know the difference. Down the corridor, Rune stood at the intersection and watched the human go. He did not move for a moment. Then he turned and walked the other way without saying anything, which, for Rune, was unusual. Siv, passing through the corridor from the other direction, had seen the whole thing. She did not stop. She continued toward the faculty wing with her files under her arm. She made a note when she got to her office. It said, "Watch this one." The observation lounge on the west side of Valos 9 had a wide viewport that faced the gas giant. Nobody used it much because the gas giant was not particularly interesting. It just hung there, brown and slow, with a thin ring that caught the light in the evening cycle. But Dale used it. He went there after the last class period, sat on the floor with his back against the viewport base, and wrote in his paper booklet. Pri had followed him there. She was aware this was not entirely polite. She stood in the doorway for a moment before he looked up. "You can sit," he said. "I don't own the room." She sat across from him and opened her datapad with the careful energy of someone who had a lot of questions and was trying to decide which one was least strange to lead with. "Can I ask you things?" she said. "You've been asking me things since this morning," he said. "The datapad is kind of a signal." She felt something that translated roughly to embarrassment. "I study Earth biology, independent research. You are the first human I have met in person and you are—" She stopped. "Disappointing," he offered. "Confusing," she said. He seemed to find that acceptable. He closed his booklet. "Ask." She asked about his childhood first, which she had planned as a warm-up question. He answered without hesitation. He had grown up in a rural area. He used a regional name she could not pronounce and described it as mostly forest and river, a small community, a lot of outdoor work from a young age. She asked what kind of work. He said tracking animals for school field studies, helping manage the local watershed, and one year when he was 12, helping guide a group of younger children to high ground during a regional flood because the adults were occupied with infrastructure. Pri stopped typing. "You were 12, she said. 11 of the kids were younger than me," he said. "Someone had to know the path. I had been up that hill before." She stared at him. What he had described as a childhood task would have qualified, on her home world, as a certified emergency response operation. The age requirement alone was 16. "Were you frightened?" she asked. He thought about it. Yes. The water was coming up fast and one of the smaller kids kept trying to go back for something she left behind. He paused. "My grandfather told me once that fear is just your body giving you information. The job is to use it, not obey it." She wrote that down word for word. "What did your grandfather do?" she asked. "Farmed, hunted, fixed things." Dale looked at the viewport. "He knew a lot about moving quietly. He said the forest teaches you if you let it." She asked him about the Griv. He said there was nothing remarkable about it. The animal had been scared, and scared animals followed predictable patterns because they were trying to survive, not trying to be unpredictable. He said the trick was to not treat it like a threat, Treat it like a thing that wanted to leave, and give it a reason to trust the direction you were offering. You gave it a reason to trust you, Pri said, in 3 seconds. About 3, yes. She looked at her datapad. She had 42 entries and the day was not over. Can I ask you something personal? Depends. Do you know how unusual you are? He looked at her with what she had already cataloged as his default expression. Mild, patient, a little bit amused. I'm a person from a planet, same as you. Your planet has a Class 7 danger rating, she said. Mine has a Class 2. Class ratings measure the environment, he said, not the people. She did not have a response to that immediately. She wrote it down anyway. What she did not notice, because she was focused on her datapad, was that Rune had come as far as the lounge doorway. He had not entered. He stood with one shoulder against the frame and listened for about 2 minutes before he left without making a sound. A Vorathi making no sound required deliberate effort. They were not built for quiet. Pri found out later, reviewing the corridor sensor log for an unrelated reason, that he had stood there for exactly 90 seconds. The next morning, something happened in the Academy food hall that she added to her records under a new category she labeled instinct or training, unable to determine. A Sorrel student, young, first year, very small, lost her tray on the way to a table. The whole thing went over, food, container, liquid. She stood in the middle of the hall looking at it with the expression of someone trying very hard not to show that they were about to cry. Dale was 6 tables away. He was already standing before anyone else reacted. He was at her side in 4 steps, and in the next 30 seconds he had cleaned up the spill with napkins from the nearest dispenser, replaced the container from the surplus rack near the wall, and got her a new portion from the service line. He set it on the nearest clean table and said something to her quietly. She nodded and sat down. Then he went back to his own table and continued eating. The whole hall had gone fairly quiet. He did not seem to notice. Pri wrote he moves toward problems. This appears to be automatic. She looked across the hall at the Sorrel student, who was eating now, a little calmer. Then she looked at Dale, who had returned to his booklet. She started a second datapad file. She titled it, Things That Are Not in the Classification Files. It was already longer than the first one. Lab 7 was the largest of the Academy's practical rooms. It had 12 containment units along the left wall, each with its own environmental control panel, and 4 specimen tables in the center under broad white lights. The air was cooler in there than the rest of the station, filtered for the comfort of the specimens rather than the students. The Veth crawler had been delivered 3 days ago from a partner research facility. It was roughly the size of a large domestic animal, low to the ground, with 6 limbs and a set of sensory antennae that it used to detect heat signatures. Its venom was not lethal to most species at the Academy, but it caused significant pain and temporary neural disruption. The containment unit was rated for organisms up to 3 times its size. The containment latch had been flagged for maintenance 11 days ago. Nobody had fixed it. Professor Siv was midway through explaining the Veth crawler's heat detection system when the latch released. She heard it before she saw it, a soft mechanical click that did not belong, and then the containment panel swung open, and the Veth crawler came out fast and low, antennae sweeping. What happened in the next 15 seconds was, in Pri's later field notes, described as a species-specific divergence in crisis response. 2 Lunari students moved immediately to the back wall. A Durathi student climbed onto the nearest table. A Sorrel student made a sound that served as both alarm call and exit strategy, which meant she was already at the door before most species had finished registering the threat. Rune grabbed the emergency stun rod from the wall rack, fumbled it because his hands were sized for Vorathi grip points, and the rod was calibrated for smaller hands, and it clattered to the floor. He swore and reached for it again. Bree pressed herself against the far wall and did what she always did when frightened. She raised her datapad. Dale did none of these things. He went still. Not frozen, there was a difference, and Bree, watching, registered it even in the moment. Frozen was what the Durathi student on the table was doing. Dale was still the way a thing is still when it is paying complete attention. His weight dropped slightly, centered. His eyes tracked the crawler across the floor. The crawler was moving in the pattern that frightened animals move. Fast bursts, then stops, antennae reading the room. It was not attacking. It was navigating. It wanted a corner or a dark space, and it was looking for one. Dale took one slow step to the left. The crawler's antennae swung toward him. He stopped. He let it read him for 2 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than anyone else in the room would have stayed still while the crawler was pointed at them. Then he moved. The tray from the specimen table nearest him. He picked it up without looking at it, holding it low and to the side, not as a weapon but as a visual block between the crawler and the left wall. The crawler shifted right. That was what he wanted. He took his jacket off in one motion, not rushed, and laid it across the floor 2 feet ahead of the crawler's new path. The crawler stopped at the jacket, antennae working over it, confused by the heat signature that was present but not moving. That bought him 4 seconds. He was already moving the equipment cases. 2 of them, stacked, lifted from the supply shelf on his left. He set them on top of the inverted storage crate that he had kicked into position during those 4 seconds, while the crawler was still investigating the jacket. The crawler moved again, right into the open mouth of the crate. Dale stepped forward and pressed the crate down with both hands and his full body weight. The equipment cases went on top before he had fully stood up again. The crawler hit the inside of the crate twice, then went still. The room was silent. Dale straightened up. He looked at the crate for a moment, making sure the weight was right. Then he looked up at the room. Rune had the stun rod in his hand now, finally. He was holding it at an angle that suggested he had been about to use it but had run out of anything to use it on. He was staring at the crate. Then he was staring at Dale. Bree realized she had recorded the whole thing. She looked at the time stamp. 51 seconds from latch failure to containment. She checked the footage. Dale had made 11 distinct movements. Every single one had a purpose. There was no wasted motion. There was no panic. Professor Civ had not moved from her position at the front of the room. She had watched everything. When the room stayed quiet, she canceled the distress signal she had been 1 button away from sending. She looked at Dale. "Where did you learn that?" she said. It did not come out quite like a question. Dale picked his jacket up off the floor. There was a small scorch mark on one sleeve where the crawler's antenna had briefly made contact. He looked at it, then looked at Civ. "My grandfather," he said. "He called it patience." Civ was quiet for a moment. Around her, students were coming down from tables and moving away from walls and making the various sounds of people who had been frightened and were now processing it. She looked at the crate, then at Dale, then at her attendance sheet. "The crawler is unharmed," she said. "Yes," Dale said. "It was just scared." Rune set the stun rod down on the table very carefully. He did not say anything. For the remainder of the class period, which Civ continued after a 10-minute recess, he did not make a single comment. He took notes. Actual notes with a writing instrument on paper, which he had never done in this class before. Bree noticed. She wrote it down. The Academy archive stayed open until the 3rd night cycle. After that, the lights dropped to minimum and the terminal screens dimmed to standby. Rune had been there since the 2nd cycle, which was unusual. He was not known for using the archive voluntarily. He had pulled the Earth classification file, the full one, not the public summary, and opened it with the specific intention of finding the thing that explained Dale. The reflex, the biological trick, the thing that made all of it automatic rather than chosen, instinct rather than intelligence, wiring rather than thinking. He was good at finding explanations for things that made him uncomfortable. He read for a long time. The file opened with geological data, an impact event that had ended a dominant species group 66 million years prior, followed by rapid adaptive radiation. Several subsequent extinction-level events, all survived by some biological lineage or another. The planet's surface was tectonically active, atmospherically variable, and had produced a broader range of macroorganism body plans than any Class 7 world on record. The file noted this was unusual. It noted it twice. The evolutionary section covered human biology specifically. Rune had expected this part to be about strength or size or natural armor. It was not. The notable entry was endurance. Humans were persistent hunters, capable of tracking prey for hours or days across distance, maintaining a sustainable pace until the prey exhausted itself. The section noted that this hunting method required not speed, not power, but patience and the ability to read behavioral patterns across time. It required the hunter to think ahead of the animal, not react to it. Rune read that paragraph 3 times. The behavioral section was longer than the biological one. This was unusual in a classification file, which typically focused on physical threat assessment. The behavioral annotations had been added over time by multiple researchers, and some of them read less like scientific observation and more like something between admiration and confusion. Humans bond voluntarily with non-compatible species. Documented cases include partnerships with organisms classified as predatory threats on other worlds. In several recorded instances, humans have intervened to protect non-human species at personal risk without apparent strategic motivation. The current working theory is that the bonding instinct in humans does not evaluate species compatibility before activating. It evaluates perceived vulnerability. If a human perceives something as being in need of protection, the bonding response initiates regardless of what the thing is. Rune sat with that for a moment. There was a footnote attached to that section. It said, "This behavior pattern appears to be the same mechanism that drove human survival through their extinction-level events. They did not survive by being the strongest organism. They survived because they kept forming groups, kept collecting others into those groups, and kept choosing to protect what they had collected. This may be the single most dangerous behavioral trait in the classification database, not because it produces violence, because it produces loyalty, and loyalty at scale is what builds civilizations." Rune closed the terminal. He sat in the dark booth for a while. The archive was empty around him. The standby lights made everything dim and blue. He thought about Dale catching the griv without being asked to. He thought about Dale in the food hall with the first-year Sorrel student and the spilled tray. He thought about Dale in Lab 7, not running, going still instead, then moving with that complete unhurried certainty, and then saying it was just scared. Rune went to the rooftop observation platform. Dale was there, sitting on the floor against the railing with his booklet open on his knee. The gas giant was in the viewport below, brown and quiet, its ring catching the last light of the station's evening cycle. Dale did not look up when Rune arrived, but he did not look surprised either. Rune sat down. He did not ask. Vorathi did not ask permission to sit. Dale did not object. They stayed quiet for a while. This was not uncomfortable for either of them, which was itself a strange thing, because Rune was not normally comfortable with silence, and Dale was not normally in the company of people who had spent the last 2 months looking for reasons to dismiss him. Rune said, "Do you actually feel fear?" He had not planned to ask it that way. It came out as a direct question, which was not typical of him. He usually built up to things with Vorathi indirection. This did not feel like a moment for that. Dale looked up from his booklet. He thought about the question seriously, which Rune noticed. "Yes," Dale said. "Every time something goes wrong, there's a second where it's very loud." He looked at the viewport. "My grandfather said fear was information. It tells you what matters. The job is to listen to what it's telling you without letting it tell you what to do. Runes thought about that. He did not respond immediately. He looked at the gas giant. He thought about the archive file, the footnote about loyalty at scale, and the image of Dale in Lab 7 standing over that crate with his jacket in one hand and his full weight keeping the lid down. "Your grandfather said that," he said. "He said a lot of things," Dale said. "Most of them turned out to be true." The station lights finished their evening cycle and came on fully across the habitat ring below. Through the viewport, the ring of the gas giant caught the light differently now, a thin, silver line. Rune did not leave. He sat there for another hour. He did not say much else, and neither did Dale. But at some point, without discussion, Rune moved from sitting against the far wall to sitting beside Dale against the railing, which was 3 feet closer, which for a Vorathi who had spent 2 months performing contempt for something was, in practical terms, a very long distance to travel. Pri would have noted it if she had been there. She was not, but she found out later. She added it to the second file. The simulation deck was built into the lower habitat ring, sealed off from the rest of the station by 4 pressure doors. Inside, the Academy had constructed a terrain environment about 400 meters across, actual soil, actual plant matter from 6 different worlds growing under broad-spectrum lights, a water channel running through the center, and a managed population of small animals selected for non-lethal behavior. The whole thing smelled like earth and vegetation and recycled water, and every time the doors opened, the students who entered made a brief involuntary pause, because nothing else on a space station smelled like that. The annual survival simulation was 2 days long. The grading criteria were straightforward: use available resources, stay healthy, complete the assigned navigation tasks. It was designed to be challenging, not dangerous. It had been running for 12 years without serious incident. The Cascade fault happened 40 minutes in. Dale had been working alone in his assigned zone, moving through a section of low ground cover toward the first navigation marker. He was not moving fast. He had no reason to. He had read the briefing materials the evening before and identified the 2 most likely complications: weather simulation in the eastern zone and the water channel's tendency to run higher than the files indicated after the lights shifted. He had planned around both. He noticed the animals first. The small crawling creatures that lived in the ground cover had been active and quiet all morning, doing what they normally did. Then, over about 90 seconds, they stopped. Not all at once, gradually, the way animals went still when something changed in the environment that they could feel but not see. They moved toward higher ground or burrowed. Dale stopped walking. He looked at the dome panels above. The light had a slightly different color than 20 minutes ago. He checked the temperature against what he remembered from the briefing. It was 2 degrees lower. He listened. The background hum of the environmental systems had changed pitch. Then the announcement started. "Attention, simulation participants," and stopped halfway through. The lights shifted again. From the eastern zone came the sound of the weather system activating at full range, instead of the partial setting it was supposed to use. Wind. Real wind, pushed through the simulation space by the environmental fans at full capacity. Then the temperature dropped hard, and the communication system made one burst of static and went silent. Pri found him 30 seconds later, running, her datapad still in her hand. She had stopped recording and started running when the announcement cut off, which Dale later told her was the correct priority order. Behind her came 2 first-year students, a small Lunari named Fen and a Sorrel called Wheeze, who was holding her left arm at an angle that suggested she had fallen during the initial zone shift. They had latched onto Pri because she was moving with purpose, which was the best quality a person could have in a confusing situation. Dale looked at the group. He looked at Wheeze's arm. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Wheeze said. "It's not I just landed on it." Okay, he looked at Pri. Your scanner, what's the clearest zone? She checked. Northwest. The zone barrier held there, it's still at baseline conditions. That's where we go, he looked at Finn. You're going to walk directly behind me. Stay in my footprints if the ground gets soft. He looked at Wheeze. You're behind Finn. Pri covers the back. Nobody argued. They started moving. He set a pace that Wheeze could hold with a hurt arm, not slow, but consistent. He kept them away from the water channel because the high-run risk was real now, and he moved them through the taller vegetation rather than around it, which cost time but kept the wind off them. Pri, at the back, had resumed recording. He navigated by the dome panels and the animal movement. The small creatures that had gone still were still tracking the disturbance, and the direction they were watching told him which zones were still active and which had settled. He moved toward settled. When the wind shifted, he adjusted. When the path sloped down toward wet ground, he found the parallel line of harder soil 30 feet to the left without explaining how he knew it was there. After 20 minutes, they reached the northwest ridge, a natural high point in the simulation terrain where the soil was dry and the wind dropped because of the terrain shape. Dale stopped them there. He built a small fire in 4 minutes from dry material he had been collecting as they walked, carrying it in the front pocket of his jacket without making a point of it. He set it in a shallow hollow that blocked the wind. We sat close to it and made a sound of relief. Rune arrived 8 minutes later from the eastern path, moving fast, with 2 younger students behind him, a Durathi pair who had apparently followed him not because he invited them, but because he was the largest thing moving with confidence during a crisis. He stopped when he saw the fire and the group. He looked at Dale. Dale looked back. No conversation happened, but something was understood. Rune moved to the outer edge of the group and stood facing back down the path he had come from. He did not sit. He watched the approaches. He had done that without being asked. Pri noted it. She wrote, Rune assumed a perimeter role autonomously. This is a coordinated group behavior. They have not spoken about it. They are just doing it. She looked at the group around the small fire. 8 students, all present, no serious injuries. The wind was still running hard through the eastern zone. The communication system was still down. She looked at Dale, who was checking Wee's arm carefully and asking her to move each finger one at a time. She wrote one more line. He did not organize this group. He just started taking care of it, and the rest of us arranged ourselves around that. The rescue team came through the northwest access door 30 minutes later. They had thermal sensors and they were looking for heat signatures. They found 8 of them in one place, gathered around a small fire, all of them okay. The team lead looked at the scene for a moment before saying anything. Then she asked who had organized the group. Before Dale could answer, Rune said, he did. He said it without hesitation, without performance, the way you state a fact about something that is not in question. Dale said they all did it together. Rune did not agree or disagree. He picked up one of the younger students who had fallen asleep near the fire and carried her toward the access door, which was a thing he did not have to do, but did anyway. Pri watched all of this and wrote nothing. For the first time in 3 datapad files, she could not think of how to reduce what she was seeing to a note. She just watched. The review board met 4 days after the simulation incident. It was a standard post-event session. 11 faculty members, 1 administrative director, and a representative from the Galactic Union's educational oversight body, who had made the trip specifically because the incident report contained the phrase, all affected students recovered safely under the coordination of a single Class 7 Death World transfer student. The oversight representative had questions. The board met in the upper faculty hall. It was a formal room, long table, high ceiling, the kind of space designed to make decisions feel significant. Professor Siv sat at the far end and waited for her turn to speak. The first 40 minutes were technical. Environmental systems failure, cascade fault analysis, the maintenance request that had not been processed in time. Someone made a proposal that the simulation deck be temporarily restricted to upper-year students only. Someone else suggested that non-combat species students be assigned separate zones with lower difficulty. A third proposal came from the oversight representative, framed carefully. Given the behavioral profile of Class 7 origin students, were there grounds to recommend enhanced monitoring protocols for the safety of the general population? He did not say human. He did not need to. Civ asked to speak. She did not stand, which was her way of signaling that what she was about to say was not a speech. It was a report. She described the griv. She described the corridor, the scattered students, the animal that had defeated 4 trained maintenance attempts in 3 weeks. She described Dale watching it for 3 seconds and then resolving it without harm to anything. She described what the students around him had done, which was scatter, and what he had done, which was stay. She described Lab 7. She described the Veth crawler loose in the room, the stun rod dropped, the students on tables and against walls. She described the 51 seconds. She described every movement Dale had made in those 51 seconds in order with purpose assigned to each one. She noted that the crawler was unharmed. She described the simulation. She described a first-year student with an arm injury, 2 younger students who had frozen in place, a Lunari with a datapad, and a Vorathi who had arrived separately with 2 more students he had collected along the way. She described a fire built in 4 minutes from materials carried in a jacket pocket while walking. She described 8 students in one place, calm, no serious injuries, a perimeter held voluntarily by a student who had spent 2 months performing contempt for the person at the center of it. Then she said, "The proposal before this board treats capability as a risk. I would ask this board to consider what we have actually observed, which is a student who used every capability he has, every time, in the direction of protecting people who were not his species, not his family, and not his assigned responsibility. That is not a behavioral risk. That is the outcome this institution exists to produce." The oversight representative was quiet. The third proposal was not voted on. The board moved to the next item. Afterward, in the common hall, Pri was waiting with a printed document in a flat binding, 340 pages. She had printed it that morning, which had taken longer than she expected, and she had spent the night before writing the introduction, which was 2 pages long and opened with, "This study began as a biology project and became something else." She handed it to Dale. He looked at the cover. It said, "Field Notes on a Human by Pri of Lunara, 2nd year." Below that, in smaller type, "Ongoing, incomplete, subject to revision." 340 entries, she said. He flipped through a few pages. He stopped at entry 94, which was a diagram she had drawn of his movement pattern during the Veth crawler incident, with lines showing each step and arrows indicating where he had been predicting the animal's next position. "You drew diagrams," he said. "I draw diagrams for everything," she said. He looked at the cover again. He borrowed a pen from the table beside him and signed it on the inside front page. Then he wrote something under his name. She read it later. It said, "For the record, I had no idea what I was doing most of the time." She added that to the study as entry 341, with the annotation, "Subject continues to be unreliable narrator of own competence." Rune found them there. He came across the common hall with that specific Vorathi gait, heavy, direct, not quite aggressive but occupying space in a way that made most species step aside. He stopped at the table. He was holding his class rank badge. 3rd year senior rank, Vorathi academic track. It was not a small thing. It represented 2 years of competitive assessment. He set it on the table in front of Dale. Dale looked at it. "For Vorathi," Rune said, "putting down your rank in front of someone means you are saying they earned it more honestly this week than you did." He paused. That is the only compliment my culture has that means anything. Dale looked at the badge for a moment. He did not pick it up. Keep it, he said. You earned yours. I saw what you did with those two students in the Eastern Zone. Rune looked at him. You moved toward them when everything was going wrong, Dale said. That's not nothing. A long pause. Something shifted in Rune's expression that was hard to translate across species, but Pri, watching, cataloged it anyway. She wrote, Entry 342, Rune accepted something. I do not have the right word for it yet. Rune picked up the badge. He did not say anything else. He sat down at the table which, for a Vorathi who had spent 2 months refusing to share space, was its own kind of statement. That evening, Dale went to the rooftop alone. The station was in its quiet cycle. The gas giant was in the viewport, same as always, brown and slow. He sat against the railing and took out a sheet of paper and wrote a message to his family. He wrote about the station. He wrote about the lab class and the food hall and the simulation. He wrote about Pri's 340-page study and Rune and the badge. He wrote it all plainly, the way he talked, without extra weight on anything. He finished the message with one line. It's strange here, but I think I'm starting to make friends. He folded the paper and looked out at the gas giant for a while. The ring caught the station light the way it always did, thin and silver and steady. Below in the common hall, the lights were still on. Rune and Pri were still at the table. Whis had joined them, arm in a support wrap, eating something from the food station. Fen was there too, showing something on a datapad to Rune, who was looking at it with the effortful expression of someone trying to be interested in a thing they did not previously think they cared about. The message went out on the next transit signal. The stars stayed where they were.